Tonight on Nation of Nation, there's a big day in Iqaluit, Nunavut, and a former senator tells us why.
I actually think it's an act of decolonization because the remote colonial administration in Ottawa, maybe well-intentioned though they've been, have been running our affairs.
Ottawa-based Isaruit Inuit Arts is facing reduced funding, and Benjamin Iqaluit tells us why this is a mistake.
Our knowledge keepers are all oral based, so as soon as they've passed on, the whole knowledge piece passes on too.
And Saskatoon columnist Doug Cuttan says don't expect big things out of the Assembly of First Nations in 2024.
But I think there's a resistance among the chiefs to move in that direction. Things seem to have sort of hit a plateau, and that's where I think Cindy Woodhouse will continue on that path.
Welcome to Nation of Nation. I'm Fraser Needham. One of the Ottawa's familiar faces retired from politics just before Christmas. His name is Dennis Patterson, and he served as the senator for Nunavut from 2009 to 2023. He is also a former premier of the Northwest Territories and was a key player in the creation of Nunavut in 1999. Mr. Patterson joins me today from Iqaluit, Nunavut, where earlier in the day he attended a signing ceremony on devolution of federal government powers in the territory. Welcome back to Nation Nation, Mr. Patterson.
Good day, Fraser.
Right, so I guess we'll start with something that you were at earlier today, and that's a signing ceremony for devolution and Nunavut. I know it's such a big issue, but maybe you can just tell or bring our viewers a bit up to date about what happened today.
Well, just a bit of background, Fraser. You know, the territories are like provinces in almost every respect. They're responsible for education, health, housing, social services, justice, all that stuff. But until today, with this agreement, Nunavut's lands and resources were managed colonially, may I say, from Ottawa. The authority and the ownership and management of lands and the revenues from those lands, including mineral royalties, all went to the federal government. So this is a huge step for Nunavut because it's a transfer from the federal government of that important responsibility. It will give Nunavut the authority to have a major say in what happens on its lands and a share of the revenues from projects that are approved. So this is, to me, it's constitutional development. It's giving Nunavut province-like authority that the two other territories already won in 2003 and 2013 in Nunavut, in Yukon and NWT. And I actually think it's an act of decolonization because the remote colonial administration in Ottawa, maybe well-intentioned though they've been, have been running our affairs without us having control. And so to me, it's decolonization, and it's a giant leap forward for the territorial government and the Inuit, who are partners in this deal through NTI.
Yes, and it like you say, I mean, it's trying to get the same sort of as the other two territories, same rights for people. And I imagine that the most important thing is maybe perception for the Inuit people that live there, that they truly feel that they have control of their own affairs and resources. Are we really close to that, or how long will it take for the perception to really, you know, this years of colonization and everything else? It's you know, it's not easy thing for people, but are we close to getting there, that people see that they really do have control of their affairs?
Well, the deal that was signed today will be implemented slowly over 3 years. And one of the key provisions there is capacity building. So the territorial government and NTI really want to see Inuit, who are, of course, the 85+% majority in Nunavut, running this department. And so there's a big component to mentor and train Inuit to run those affairs. And I think when that happens, especially when that happens and it's fully crystallized, people are going to realize that we now have the ability to manage our own affairs in Nunavut. And we can no longer turn to or blame, you know, a distant colonial master, decisions made in Nunavut by the elected government will be decisions that respond to the needs and wishes of the people of Nunavut. So I think the awareness is going to evolve, but there'll be a huge celebration tomorrow, because this is a giant leap forward for Nunavut. And may I say, having been involved in the NWT devolution negotiations and the legislation that, by the way, legislation will have to be passed to put this into force in Ottawa, this is the best deal of all three. It's got provisions there that recognize the difficulty of dealing with contaminated sites. There are a number of dew-line sites and contaminated sites in Nunavut that are addressed in the agreement. It recognizes that climate change is impacting those sites and needs to be taken into account. There's a provision for a joint review of the legislation by the Inuit and the government of Nunavut in a kind of a co-development approach that will be, I think, precedent-setting for the other territories and even the rest of Canada. So it's going to signal a new era of true self-government in Nunavut, I believe.
Fair point, and we're running a little short on time, but I have to ask you about your decision to leave the Conservative Party, of course, a couple of years ago during the height of the convoy movement, and I guess it wouldn't be affiliation, maybe certain members' flirtations with the convoy movement, and that must have been a very difficult decision for you.
I left the caucus in the Senate and the Commons because I didn't like the support for the truckers. My constituents, who often are living in Ottawa or going there for medical or education reasons, and some are homeless, sadly, on the streets of Ottawa. They were all inconvenienced and even outraged and offended by the tone of that protest, by the racism, and they were scared for their safety. And so I left the caucus in protest, and I still think that there's some extreme voices in the party, including anti-vaxxers that do not resonate with me. But I'm still supporting the Conservatives. I'd like to see a change in government, and I'm hoping that we will have a more moderate approach to issues like those protests and the need for public health measures like vaccinations going forward.
So maybe to be more accurate, I guess you left the caucus, but not the party necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah.
So unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there for time purposes. We could talk all day about several things, but really great to have you on the show, and all the best in the next chapter of your life, and as you enjoy some retirement and maybe some relaxation, some other things beside public service. So once again, thanks very much for joining us.
I've got a few stories to tell, Fraser. I want to do some writing in retirement, so thank you.
Up next, we'll have Saskatoon Star Phoenix columnist Doug Cuthand. Will give us his thoughts on what to expect on the reconciliation front in the coming year. You're watching Nation to Nation, and I'm Fraser Needham. It's a new year, and with it comes discussion about what we can expect on the reconciliation front. Who better than to bring in on the discussion than Saskatchewan journalist Doug Cuthand? For many years, Cuthand has been writing a weekly column on Indigenous issues in the Saskatoon Star Phoenix. He's one of the most well-respected journalists in the province, who was writing about reconciliation long before the term had actually been coined. Doug Cuthand joins me today from his home in Saskatoon. Welcome back to Nation to Nation, Doug. It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's nice to be here.
All right, so as we were discussing a bit earlier, I think it was your December 30th column, you talked about what we can expect on the reconciliation front this year. You had some criticisms, but talked about several different things. But let's start with the new national chief at the Assembly of First Nations, who is, of course, Cindy Woodhouse. What do you see? They had some turmoil, obviously, the last few years, but what do you see happening this year, and with the relationship with the government, Trudeau government, of course?
Yeah, well, it's hard to. Well, Cindy's fairly establishment type of leader. She'll be working with the chiefs and with the government, and I don't see that much change from when Perry Bellegarde was the leader. Roseanne Archibald tried to sort of shake things up and get more activist, but I think there's a resistance among the chiefs to move in that direction. Things seem to have sort of hit a plateau, and that's where I think Cindy Woodhouse will continue on that path.
Yeah, and you raised some interesting points there. I mean, the ultimate power is with the chiefs, right? And of course, they're supposed to report to their membership. Membership tells us all the time they don't like what the AFN's doing. They don't like direction. They just don't see it going positively. How does this sort of dynamic change? I guess if you have it's not a good situation to have the people that are represented by this leadership and another level of leadership not happy with how they're being represented. That's not a very good situation. How do you see that changing, though?
Well, I think there's always been friction or inside the Assembly First Nations. Basically, it's a very disparate group of chiefs. Some have treaties, some don't have treaties, some are negotiating treaties. Others are, like in the East Coast, are long-term treaties of peace and friendship. So there's a whole different group of agendas on the table, to move things ahead. And it's very difficult for the national leader to balance all these things. And I watched it over the years. The organization traditionally seems to have gone back and forth between a leader from Western Canada or a treaty chief representing treaty chiefs to one from the East, or British Columbia representing bands that have Aboriginal rights. So it goes back and forth and back and forth. And it's been a difficult road for this organization.
Right, and there's also, of course, you cover quite closely the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, which is in your home province of Saskatchewan. There'll be an election there this year. You mentioned it briefly. What do you see happening there? Will they all likely run again? Will there be many changes there?
I'm a little early to talk about that right now because it's going to take place in the fall. We don't know what's going to happen. There has been a controversy. The current chief, Bobby Cameron, it was discovered he had a criminal record dating back to when he was a teenager. It's supposed to have been erased, and he's supposed to have not had it. You can't run with a criminal record for leadership in Saskatchewan. This, of course, is about a 20-year-old record, but still, that's sort of sitting there as a bit of a red herring right now. And I don't know if there's other leaders coming up. I hesitate to get too involved because I've done it in the past. I've predicted the winner, and when it came true, I was accused of rigging the elections or taking sides or whatever. And I got myself in some hot water, so I just gave it up. I said I'm not going to be a pundit about provincial leadership anymore.
And you briefly touch on sort of the business world, or Canadian National Railway anyway, whose 12-member, I think, board all resigned just before Christmas, saying that they just didn't feel that they were being listened to. That's a bad situation, obviously. What needs to happen there now?
Yeah, this was this actually didn't receive as much press coverage as it should have. This was very serious. It was one of Canada's largest corporations, put together a blue ribbon panel of people to assist it with reconciliation. And after about, I think, 2 years of no action, they all quit. And I think it's something that needed to be looked at deeper and had to some analysis taken. And where are all, not only Canadian National Railway, but where are all the other corporations in on this? There's a lot of big corporations in Canada that spend Indian money or operate within Indian territory or First Nations territory, pardon me. And they have a growing impact on, and we as a growing population with growing interests in business have got to be considered more seriously. So I think this had to be dealt with a little bit, more than by the news media and by government itself. People have got to look at reconciliation. What does it really mean? I think we've hit a bit of a plateau. all across Canada. Reconciliation has sort of kind of ground to a halt. We've got, it's on one level, you got a lot of symbolism. You got people, land identification and stuff like that. But then on the other hand, during this cold snap here in the prairies, we've got our people are homeless. They're sitting on the, in warming shelters. They're in the streets. There's enormous poverty, enormous drug addiction, enormous issues that have to be dealt with. And reconciliation is kind of a comfortable middle-class way to get around some of these really grinding issues. And that's why I think reconciliation has got to be re-examined, and we got to get down to some real brass tacks here instead.
Right. Well, we'll have to end it there, unfortunately, for time. But of course, this is something that, of course, covering another story about the National Council for Reconciliation of how to, measure the government's progress and set benchmarks there. And that's a much more complex task than I think the government understands, maybe. But that's a conversation for another day. But thanks once again for joining us. It's always such a pleasure, and I love reading it. Even though I live here now, I've lived in Saskatchewan for many years, and I never fail to miss your column and read it all the time, and it always is great. So thanks once again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Oh, thank you very much.
Up next, we'll talk to two individuals who work at Ottawa-based Isaruit Inuit Arts. They provide grassroots Inuit language training in the city, but are being forced to deal with significant government budget cuts. You're watching Nation to Nation, and I'm Fraser Needham. The Trudeau government continues to say it is committed to Indigenous language programming, but the reality is grassroots organizations that provide these services are on the verge of closing their doors if they haven't done so already. Earlier this week, media reported Map House, which provides Michif training in Brandon, Manitoba, is dealing with significant funding cuts. Ottawa's Isaruit Inuit Arts, which provides training in Inuit languages, says it is in a similar situation because of these same funding cuts. Joining me today are Beverly Iluk and Benjamin Iluk of Isaruit Inuit Arts. Welcome to the show. So Ben and Beverly, thanks very much for joining us on the on Nation to Nation today.
We feel very welcome.
Thank you. So I guess I start. It's I think many people don't know the sort of the services that you provide and what you're doing here in Ottawa. It sounds like a very valuable service. But can you tell me a little bit? I know you're in the old Rideau High School. I know you're doing Indigenous languages, Inuit languages training, obviously through the work you do. But I'll let either one of you, whoever wants to go, just to describe to me how you got to the point where this women, I guess the sewing circle moved into, or what you were previously called into what I guess it's Isaruit Inuit Arts today.
Yeah, so 2018, bunch of women in grandmothers of Inuit families living in Ottawa got together, said we needed a place where we could go and just be speaking Iqaluit, eat the way we eat what we eat, and do what we want to do and talk the way we need to. No other organizations provided that for us women. We started a little sewing group. You can imagine how that went. We got free space in what's now called the Rideau Hub, the former Rideau High School when it was discontinued use as a school. And we started to grow from there. And then the men came along and said, hey, we want in. And so instead of calling ourselves, our legal name is Isaruit Inuit Women's Sewing Center, we are now Isaruit Inuit Arts. And we have moved into a space that is a wonderful former welding shop in the former high school. So we have a tremendous shop program going, as well as a tremendous sewing program going, as well as really a truth and reconciliation section where we welcome people and do consultations and welcome not only non-Inuit, but most of all, welcome Inuit.
Okay, and then if you can tell me now a broader, because I think that many people, we live in a time of revitalization, of course, of Indigenous language, and yet a lot are under threat, in Inuit languages as well. It's a dire situation. It's very important to do what you're doing, and maybe you can explain, though I'm paraphrasing, to tell me why speaking to all our viewers, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, why this is so vital that we keep funding this properly and that you keep doing your work.
There's not a lot of organizations that emphasize on mentoring the youth, the future of this country, and we're trying to take initiative on that. Our knowledge keepers are all oral based, so as soon as they've passed on, the whole knowledge piece passes on too. So we're trying to do a catch up on that for these X amount of years that it hasn't been done. So that's basically what we do in all of our programming, is mentoring each other and taking ideas from each other and taking stories and making them whole. So yeah, that's basically
in Inuktitut.
Yeah.
Right.
Written, but purely verbal.
Yes, and I guess in a nutshell, if I just describe this in another way, it's, Indigenous languages, all of them are largely orally based. The elders have this knowledge. They're not going to live forever there, and there's that danger always if it hasn't been revitalized properly and they do pass away, then the language could disappear, if I'm saying it right.
And it's not just the language, it's all of the culture. For example, the Inuit have the Inuit principles, the 8 principles, societal principles that govern Inuit life, have for generations and eons. And what happens is when you don't have language, you can't work in that context. Here at Isaruit, we work in Inuktitut. Inuktitut is the working language. And so as a result, we work with those principles. We are not in a hierarchical colonial system here. We are working as an organism, as an owl, actually, one wing shaw, one wing sewing, tail is the board, beak is the coordinator, the claws. We work as an organism. That is Inuktitut style. The government of Canada can learn from the richness of Indigenous cultures. And this is an example of one item. We gave a set of the 8 posters of Inuit Kauimakataqana to Mona Fortier when she was still Treasury Board President. And we asked her to please take them to the government because we can help the government of Canada run this country properly because it's supported by Inuit and Inuit language.
Okay, we're
and
gonna.
Culture.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, that's yeah. We could probably talk. There's so much to this, and unfortunately for time purposes in the show, that we'll have to end it there. But really, I want to thank you for joining me today and telling me about what is such a vital service that many Canadians, I think, non-Indigenous don't know about. So it's something that we're lucky to have you on the show today, and we're glad we were able to arrange it on short notice. So once again, thank you for joining me, Beverly and Ben. We really appreciate it.
Thank you as well.
That concludes this week's episode of Nation to Nation. If you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcast at aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Fraser Needham. Good night.